Hey there, welcome back to the PeopleFirst Podcast, the Young Careers Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Spry. It's results season, and you may have found this episode at the perfect time. The goal of this episode is to empower our listeners with knowledge on what path they can take after school. For some people, their school may only talk about university. For others, they might want to start vocational training straight away, but don't know how to. Today, we want to discuss the pros and cons of the most common pathways to a meaningful life. For some healthy debate, I'm joined by Conor Cotton, Managing Director of Not Going to Uni, and Chris Ree, Head of Commercial Services and Graduate Careers Expert at Prospects. Welcome to the podcast, guys. So just to start, Chris, Conor, would you mind just giving us a little bit of an intro into yourselves and the job that you do?
Yeah, happy to kick off with that.
I'll let you go first, Chris.
Thanks, Chris Ree. I'm Head of Commercial Services at Prospects, which is part of GISC. GISC is an education charity that powers colleges and universities with digital services and infrastructure. Prospects has been around since 1972, actually, and our role is to help students and graduates get access to careers guidance information, access to job opportunities, further study, and we work particularly strongly with careers services. Everything we do is really orients around Prospects AC UK, and the heart of that is a tool called Job Match, which helps students understand the range of options available to them. It answers that fundamental question: what can I do with my degree?
Thank you. And Conor, did you want to go ahead?
Absolutely. So I'm Conor. I'm the Managing Director of a company called Not Going to Uni. Not Going to Uni ultimately exists to give young people the information and opportunities if they're considering their options, be it post 16 or post 18, not sure if they want to go to uni or categorically no already. What options are out there, be it apprenticeships, first year jobs, gap years, traineeships, and ultimately everything in between that sort of goes against that traditional go to sixth form and then go to university.
That makes sense. Thank you both. I really appreciate that. This is actually quite fitting for me today. It's a good podcast to talk on because as much as I was looking after Brook Street for the last year and a half, I've recently just taken a new role in the early careers team at Manpower Group. So I'm very new to the world of early careers, and I've sat in on a couple of calls over the last 2 weeks while I've been onboarding, and it's actually made me sort of regret some of the decisions that I made after graduating, before graduating. So this will be, I think, a good, knowledge sharing session for me too, as well as the listeners. But what I want to do, and we ask everyone that comes on the podcast, but I would love to know from you both what your first job was. And I mean the very first job, talk to me about the paper rounds, talk to me about those sorts of things,
Jordan, it was a paper round, actually.
Yeah. Good.
yeah. 1978, paper round. And I went from there. I just got more and more paper rounds. At one point I was doing 6 morning rounds, 6 evening rounds, and a Sunday round, and that went on for many years. Just out of interest, I'm not sure how common the paper round is now as an entry into the world of work for younger people, but certainly back then it was actually highly prized. Getting a decent paper round was worth its weight in gold.
Yeah, 100%. I can vouch for that as well. It was very difficult to get a paper round job whenever I was coming up through the ranks, so it was great. What about you, Conor?
It was actually supporting with football coaching for a couple of local teams and a couple of sort of local sort of academy setups as well. So supporting them with the prep for sessions and things like that. So I was certain that was the pathway I was going to take as well, going through my career. But as you can tell by me being here now, it's not the pathway I had taken in the end.
No, that makes sense. Well, you wouldn't be here then on this podcast if not, so thankfully for that. I guess the reason we're here is to think about these career routes. So if we think firstly about apprenticeships, for example, Conor, when people hear apprenticeships, their mind probably automatically goes to classic blue collar apprenticeships, a mechanic or a plumber, for example. These are obviously really, really valuable industries, but does this actually truly reflect the range of apprenticeships that are available today? And then to go even deeper, what exactly are apprenticeships and what types are out there?
Yeah, I think the short answer is no. It certainly doesn't reflect the market anymore. Don't get me wrong, there was certainly a time and Chris has been in this industry even longer than I have, and he'll know over the years how, there was a time where actually a lot of those apprenticeships were going to be an electrician and things like that, and that was the focus of apprenticeships, and other than that, anything else was generally a university pathway. But especially in recent years, that has massively changed. You can now go and be a solicitor via the apprenticeship route, which is, very white collar, very traditional, law school in previous terms. And now actually you can go and work in a major London-based law firm without actually necessarily going to university.
Yeah.
So the opportunity has opened up really widely. You still have those blue collar opportunities, and like you said, they're really big industries, and they're industries we always need people for at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, there's a wider pathway out there into loads of other opportunities, be it engineering, law, and so much more. And there's always new opportunities being and entering the market every single year. Ultimately, an apprenticeship works that for, putting it in very simple terms, generally speaking, 4 days a week you are in your job, you're earning a salary, you are a member of the team, and very hands-on, and 20% of your time, so usually a day a week, is spent with the learning aspect. So that could be, if you're doing a degree level apprenticeship, going to a university. And if you're doing a level 3, for example, it could be going to a college, or it could be doing some online learning and other opportunities like that. So you get that blended approach between working and earning a salary, but then also picking up the degree or slightly lower level qualification in that 20% time.
How competitive, would you say apprenticeships are at the moment? And is there sort of a typical route that people take?
Especially degree level apprenticeships. So those apprenticeships where you ultimately would earn a higher salary and get a free degree at the end of it. Those are certainly the most competitive, because unfortunately they're not an endless supply. And you can imagine at the end of the day, there's a lot of students that go to university every year, and a lot of those students obviously look at degree level apprenticeships, and there's only X amount of job roles. So, a solicitor firm might only hire 2 degree apprentices, but get 2, 3, 4, 500 applications who potentially all meet the criteria. They've all got the right grade entry requirements for the degree aspect, and are ultimately good candidates with the right skill set. So it's certainly competitive. Thankfully, every year the numbers seem to increase of opportunity. Obviously, during the time of COVID, there was a dip in some industries, but now we're through that now, and actually you're seeing every year companies are starting to move that needle a little bit on how many young people they can bring in, which should hopefully give some of those young people that typically, because of the competitive nature, haven't been able to get a foot in the door, can.
Could you just jump in there? It'd be interested to know, Conor, what your thoughts are about the perception of apprenticeships, even up to degree apprenticeships, because I think it's possible there's still a certain sort of, I won't say negative associations, but maybe there's not the kind of awareness of the richness of the opportunities available. And is there still some sort of stigma associated with the word apprenticeship? Mm-hmm. What do you think about that?
I think it's a generational thing, is what we notice. So parents are such a big influence on a young person's career at the end of the day, and the choices they make throughout their educational journey. So I think as a byproduct of that, one of the big pushbacks are a lot of parents, like you said, will be thinking apprenticeship from 20 years ago. So they'll be thinking blue collar, potentially the T-boy, the T-girl kind of vibe, where actually they're not hands-on and they're not really going to get the opportunity to be hands-on within that organisation and actually do the job that they've signed up for. So I think there's more needs to be done there, actually, to educate those parents and teachers, I'd probably say as well, because I don't think necessarily teachers within schools, rightly so, that's why they have careers leaders, they don't understand necessarily the breadth of careers education, because they're not, they haven't trained in it, they haven't taught in it. So if we can have those influencers understand that apprenticeships aren't what they once were, that should hopefully have a knock-on effect to allow young people to be able to go, oh, okay, this is a viable pathway for me. And they're not going home and saying, I'm going to do this apprenticeship, and their parents going, oh, apprenticeship, that's not right.
Yeah, I would say to be honest, Connor, experienced both the things that you're talking about from my parents and from my teachers too. Whenever I was in school, I think I have 5 GCSEs. I didn't do very, very well. And after that, I had a bit of a chip in my shoulder that I wanted to be as educated as physically possible, But there was a lot of pressure from my mum, her friends, what people were doing. If you weren't going to study teaching or go to a really good Russell Group uni, it was sort of looked down upon. And apprenticeship seemed like you only did something like that if you were a hairdresser or something, of that ilk. But I realized, I think, when I got to uni that all I wanted to really do was work and make like that contribution. I found my part-time job a bit more rewarding than the actual studying was. But nowadays, whenever we're in this industry and you hear about the top 100 graduate schemes, the likes of going into somewhere like PwC or EY, for example, where it's a really, really attractive life for apprentice or someone who wants to just be qualified by experience. And I just don't understand. I personally can't see why it's not plugged enough in schools, or maybe it is now since I left 10 years ago. But I just think you can tell amongst the audience, can't tell amongst young people that I think apprenticeships still are almost looked down upon from a teacher's perspective. And if we think back to the employer lens, what do you think employers are looking for in apprenticeship candidates? What sort of hard or soft skills? Because most of them, I'm guessing, won't have any experience to offer. So what sort of things are employers looking for to pick out the best candidate?
I think sometimes it obviously varies depending on the pathway and the industry. I think the lines are probably way more blurred than they once were because of what you've just alluded to. At the end of the day, if you sign up for an engineering apprenticeship scheme, they're not necessarily expecting you to come and know how to do X, Y, Z on the plane, on the train, on the car that you're signing up for. But a lot of it is things like your communication skills, those kind of teamwork skills, having that attitude that you want to turn up and you want to be your best. You're going to ask questions, that kind of can-do attitude. Like I said, they're not expecting you to know everything, so they're going to want you to be eager to learn. They're going to want you to be open to asking questions and putting your hand up and things like that, because at the end of the day, that's how they're going to mould you. They want malleable candidates, right? Because they're probably looking at that young person and thinking, right, can we, support that young person and cultivate them that they can have a great career here for many years to come? At the end of the day, because post-apprenticeship, they'll hopefully want to keep you on board and let you flourish through the ranks. And there's a really great story I saw this morning about I think it's the chief commercial officer of Superdrug, started as like a store apprentice 25 years ago, and has gone, when you look at they took a screenshot of their like LinkedIn career pathway, and they've started all the way at the bottom on a very, very low salary doing the manual labor jobs, and they've progressed through those ranks. And that's what that's what these organizations are looking for, those malleable young candidates who are eager to learn, who they can support and mold, and hopefully can become C-suite execs within those organisations for years to come and take on positions of leadership and much more. But I don't necessarily think there's a one-size-fits-all either. Like I said, there will be some industries that will look for niche skill sets. We've done a lot of work with the Royal Air Force, and when you look at their logistics roles, they figured out that one of the common characteristics is, people in gaming there, and people that are really big on gaming and certain strategy games, and those often correlate to really great candidates. So they might look at people and speak about your experiences and hear that and go, oh, okay, based on our trends of who we've hired and who's gone through the ranks, you're going to be an ideal candidate. So there will be slight curveballs in there like that scenario as well.
Chris, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Well, yeah, what Conor's just described, it's not dissimilar to graduate recruitment. I mean, in terms of what the recruiter's looking for, it's about the individual. It's about recruiting on potential, and by that stage, the experience portfolio is going to be a bit more developed for the applicant, obviously. That have had more work opportunities, more structured employability, etc. But fundamentally, I think recruiters are looking for the same sort of values and aspects, really. And I think as a general point about this, for anybody going for a job at any stage or an opportunity, it's just to remember that it's a risky business for recruiters. They really need to get it right. Because I think it's quite easy, especially, the younger you are going into that world of applications and jobs and opportunities and training, you feel that you don't necessarily have a lot of power in the relationship or in the encounter. But you do. The recruiter is just as apprehensive about getting it right as you are as the candidate. And I think the more we can encourage this idea that it's a meeting of equals, both parties have got a lot to gain from the transaction, if you like, and a lot to lose as well. But recruitment, as you'll know, it's a time-consuming and expensive business, and there are a lot of risks attached to it. So I think it's important to foster that idea amongst students, really, whatever stage they are.
That was beautifully put, Chris, to be honest with you. And as something we've heard a lot recently, or I've heard a lot, and I really like it, is that you can't teach the desire to work, So if someone comes and they're young and they're hungry and they've got that potential, surely that is a dream candidate, Obviously, you both are from great platforms, but how can a candidate now find apprentice jobs locally? Where is the best place to start looking? And what would you recommend sort of as a good starting point?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, shameless plug,
Go
platforms
on.
like
Yeah.
prospects, etc. You can filter by location, postcodes, things like this. So we hopefully make it as organisations. I know Chris was there the same. As easy as possible for you to look locally and nationwide, and in cities you might want to move to, and so on, or commute to, for that fact as well. One thing that I think is under looked at for apprenticeships is actually FE colleges. So if you're looking at that post-16 apprenticeship pathway, FE colleges will have an internal apprenticeship team and will run the training element of apprenticeships locally. So it's always worth not just looking at an FE college's courses, but an FE college's apprenticeship setup as well, because they will likely be advertising apprenticeship schemes that they are running, be it electricians, be it hospitality and catering, whatever that may be. Same with universities, looking at degree level apprenticeships. A lot of organisations, generally speaking, run recruitment campaigns their own, and they'll work with organisations like ourselves to do that. However, universities may and will often also advertise those pathways themselves. For example, we've just been doing a big bit of work with the University of Kent for their Kent Business School, because they have a large volume of apprenticeship schemes that they want to raise aware of and hopefully benefit their clients at the end of the day, by getting candidates ready to go and say, okay, L'Oreal, you've got, we're your training provider, and by the way, here's 10 candidates ready to go, have registered their interest with the University of Kent for this scheme. So looking at the educational providers is important. There's also big nationwide apprenticeship training providers who work with organisations like ourselves, and you'll be able to find online who will advertise, like your QAs and so on. And to be honest with you, there's other tools you can do. Some clients will use LinkedIn, probably more so, as Chris will probably talk about, in the graduate market than the apprenticeship market, but you do see some creep in there a little bit more. And looking at what's going on locally, be it your school and your careers advisor, will probably be knowing what it's like with careers advisors bombarded with companies saying, we've got this going on, we've got that going on, we've got these opportunities. I'm a school governor for 2 local schools, and our careers advisor is always inundated with local SMEs contacting them with opportunities for people that are finishing sixth form. So it's always worth a conversation if they're in year 13 now or year 12 with your careers advisor and saying, what's been sent, what's been dropped in your inbox recently, so you can start to understand what employers in your local area, especially if you're more remote, might be hiring.
And Conor, would you say there's a gender split across apprenticeships? Do we need to encourage more girls to consider them? Is it mainly male dominated? Let me know what you think about that.
I think it's interesting because our if you look at our website at the core of our business, that kind of goes against the curve that there's a split overall. We're actually the other side in the sense that we actually get more female users than male users, although as someone who was once a teenage boy, I can say that is probably because teenage boys are super lazy at the best of times. I know I was one of them.
I would echo that too.
Yeah, did not want to put the yards in, and was more worried when I was 18 about, a lad's holiday in the summer than looking at opportunities, to be quite honest with you. So I think there's a little bit of science there, because I'm probably not too dissimilar to many others. However, I would say there is industries where there needs to be a greater push on opening the door to anyone and everyone. Typically, there's a lot of STEM pathways that are very, male heavy. I've spoken a little bit about the RAF, for example, and we're talking about logistics engineering within the Royal Air Force, 70, 80, 90% male dominated. And it'll be the same amongst a lot of other logistics engineering employers. So I think it's an industry specific thing. I think we see a lot of, law industry, things like this. It's fairly equal in terms of applications that we see coming into those organisations. But certainly in those engineering pathways, things like that, there definitely needs to be a greater split between not just loads and loads of male applications.
Is there anything an employer can do to promote applications from like females or from males or either side of the split?
I think it's utilising content and showcasing different stories. I think at the end of the day, if you're, a young female and you're scrolling through TikTok and the content you're seeing on XYZ engineering employer is all a load of blokes working on, you're not necessarily going to feel invited in.
No.
At the end of the day, so you need to think from an employer branding perspective. How are you putting your best foot forward? Are you showcasing yourself as an employer that only has loads of guys working for you? Because if you are, that's not going to be inviting at the end of the day.
Yeah.
You're not going to feel equal. You're not going to feel like, oh, that's not really an employer for me. Flip that on its head, though. If an employer is showing that actually there's, females, there's everyone, and it's open to anyone, they should hopefully feel way more invited in. And when they're thinking about those decisions, might go, well, I know that I've seen, there's a big thing at the moment about female train drivers. So a lot of the major rail companies are showcasing these amazing stories of female train drivers who have gone through the ranks and now are getting amazing earning potential and things like that to show, young women coming out of education that actually is a pathway for them and it's not just a boys' club ultimately.
I love that answer. Thank you for that. And then if we are moving on to university, Chris, I'm going to come to you. What are the key things that young people need to consider when deciding when to apply for university? Do they need to go to uni to get a good job?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, that. I mean, I think it depends on how we understand what a good job is. I mean, if you mean a job that is happy, fulfilling, rewarding, aligns with your interests, you can build on to develop a career out of, that you can earn well, no, you don't have to go to university to do that at all. And I think, referring back to earlier when we were talking about the sort of democratisation of access to opportunities nowadays, I think that there's so many more routes you can go down now to end up in that happy position. The position that you want for everybody, isn't it? To be fulfilled where you're working, to have a good balance in your life with work and everything that's important outside of work, to earn enough to live well, etc. You don't have to go to university to do that. However, it's certainly going to university can help you get a good job. When we think about the type of work that graduates typically go into, 3/4 of them are in professional level work, which is a very broad description, but it's broadly speaking is the kind of jobs where it helps to have a degree, or actually you have to have a degree in order to do them. But again, they're not absolute models anymore, because there are more ways into those. So I think, no, you don't have to go to university to get a good job, but going to the university can help you get a good job. And some research suggests that the earning power of graduates over time is greater than non-graduates. But of course, that depends on what industries and sectors and what types of jobs you're talking about. I think the important thing is in terms of how we present this back to students and the people who are going to enter this world over time, it is to present as many routes and ways in and gateways as possible, and not be prescriptive about it. And Jordan, what you were saying about the emphasis on going to university, that is still very prevalent in a lot of schools and colleges, particularly, as if that is the only route, the only way to success and happiness. Of course, it obviously isn't. And I think everybody's job is to present all those opportunities in the best possible way.
Apart from gaining a degree, I mean, I know the answer to this question. I can talk from my own experience, but apart from gaining a degree, what other benefits do you think that university provides?
social side of it, and that is, I think that's vastly attractive still, isn't it? I mean, it always has been a very important part. And by that, I don't just mean the pleasurable social occasions and interactions, which are obviously significant, but it's the socializing aspect of it as well. It's the times, the concentrated time spent learning how to be with other people, the exposure to a lot of very different cultural and experiential backgrounds, etc. You're thrown in with people that you probably wouldn't otherwise encounter at that stage in your life, or maybe not ever. So it's learning how to develop yourself in that sort of situation. I mean, so it's like a massive experiment. It's a massive national experiment, isn't it, in socialising. It's also a way of getting a lot of 18-year-olds to leave home. That shouldn't be underestimated as well. It's one way, and of course, not everybody does leave home and to go to university, but still a significant number do. So it has all sorts of like social development functions attached to it, which I think, you know, can be very rich for most people, but not necessarily for everyone. The modern experience now cannot be separated from career readiness and preparation and employability. And I think that's a huge difference going back, certainly to my time at university, and probably it's accelerated in the last 10 or 15 years. It's very hard to go through university now without being exposed to some sort of employability preparation, is it, or training. The role of career services are obviously vital in all of this. And I think that's another big plus point in the university system's favour. It's the existence of a very well established, very comprehensive careers guidance infrastructure. If you take advantage of it, like a lot of people who work in early careers, I never did, and I'm not going to say I regret it necessarily, but I think it's there to be used, absolutely. And that's embedded in the curriculum now in ways that it couldn't have been imagined years ago as well. Yeah. So that's a general experience plus the academic qualification, which may or may not be the thing that your future hinges on, but will certainly contribute to it. But all the other stuff as well will help contribute to what the employer is looking for. When we're talking about what the recruiters want and what values do they respond to, well, a lot of that can be learned at university. Not exclusively, but it certainly can be.
Well, I think one of the most common things we hear, and Chris won't be surprised, is, you know, the reason some young people tell us, oh, I'm going to pick university is that social aspect, because when you're going into the workplace, don't get me wrong, you have a social life, and a lot of companies will talk about culture and, you know, company socials and things like that, but you're going to probably more than likely be mixing a very different age demographic, probably a much older demographic, whereas, you know, you go to university and you're mixing with, usually, I know there's obviously anomalies to this, but usually a similar age bracket by either the same year or a year or two above. So I think that's definitely a huge factor for some young people, because like Chris said, they, you know, a lot of them have never left home. Some of them won't have even left the town or city they live in. So it's a huge life experience for them. And, you know, that's certainly one that not all apprenticeship or alternative routes can give you.
Yeah.
So, you know, if that's a big part for you, is actually broadening your horizons in that way, then it's 100% something you need to do, and a lived experience you need.
We often hear of there being too many students and not enough jobs, or at least this is what me and my friends heard at school. What actually is the graduate job market like at the moment, and what jobs would you both say are the highest in demand for graduates in 2024?
The graduate job market is fundamentally in a very strong state of health. It tends to be very resilient. It weathers recessions and economic downturns and times of hardship very well indeed, and it's long lasted as well. I mean, this is stretching the point a little bit, but it's possible to say there's been a graduate job market since the 11th century, when people first started going to university. Obviously, it's a very, very different experience then. And actually, it stayed a very, very different experience really right up to the 1990s, when we saw that expansion of the sector and, you know, a lot of polytechnics becoming universities, and the extraordinary growth in terms of student numbers and size of campuses and institutions that's taken place since then. But in spite of that size, there's still a perennial demand for graduates. We talk about graduates going into professional work, and it is quite often said, Jordan, like you say that anecdotally, well, where are all the graduate jobs? So there's not enough. But actually, if anything's true, there aren't enough graduates for the professional level jobs that they go into. And that's just like a fact of the way the economy is nowadays. Most of the growth in new jobs, the development of sectors is in professional level work. So having a qualification and the skills and experience to work in that is always going to be in demand. Now, the problem is it's not an alignment necessarily. It's not just a case of matching up the numbers, because, of course, a lot of these are in sectors and occupations where there are long-standing shortages. I mean, STEM's an obvious one, isn't it? I mean, there's a big shortage in many, many STEM occupations, teaching, nursing. And in fact, there's an extraordinarily long list of occupational shortages, include vets and sports coaches and surveyors, engineers of all kinds. And of course, not all graduates are trained or have been trained in order to fill those sorts of roles. But nonetheless, there's still great opportunities for graduate employment. It's a healthy job market. Unemployment runs at a lower level than it does in the general working population. And it's not just like the stats of where people are working and what they're earning, etc. The Graduate Outcomes Survey, which is done 15 months after graduation every year, and it has high participation rates. It's a very good picture of what's actually going on in graduate employment. There's a section called Graduate Voice where graduates speak about they say that they're using, high numbers of them say they're using what they learned at university in the job, or they're experiencing satisfaction with what they're doing, etc. So on the whole, it seems that graduates report positive outcomes themselves about what they're doing. And the job market is still very, very fertile. Doesn't mean that everybody's going to get the job that they want or the job that they've trained for. It can take a long time to do that. But I think there's an important message that needs to be reinforced repeatedly to students, is that you are going into, frankly, whatever level you're entering that world, it is a world of opportunity still. The trick is just to get people to understand that and to match up the employers with candidates. That's the perennial headache for everybody working in this sector.
Since we've covered off with your areas, I'm just going to ask some questions to you both now, if that's okay. So, further education obviously doesn't always mean university. What other options are there out there for post-school qualifications and training? What could we consider? What should we consider?
There's definitely more than just apprenticeships. I think, the reason the brand is called Not Going to Uni as well. And Chris, not knowing the history of prospects, probably the reason prospects is prospects as well and covers a multitude of opportunity is because we as a nation sometimes go too far one way, not enough of the other, and we just focus on apprenticeships for university, when actually you've got this big pillar in the middle. You've got first year jobs, which is what I did. So I left school and never actually went on to a formal qualification based pathway. I didn't go to university. I rejected my university offers. And I did what would be classed as a first year job. It was a job with in-house training without ultimately gaining a qualification. So an apprenticeship without the 20% ultimately is what a first year job is. And that's certainly something we've seen growing, I think, especially in sales industries and things like that, where, and Chris will know this, running sales teams, like some of the sales apprenticeship qualifications aren't that great, to be quite honest with you. So actually doing a first year job and learning in-house is often better. But you've also got a lot of new government initiatives. Skills boot camps is one that's massively growing. We've seen there's an organisation called Generation UK who are they're the biggest skills boot camp provider, but there's a lot of others as well. And ultimately those are sort of 6-week programs that can set you up in a specific industry, typically IT, web development, etc., with the prospect of a job at the end of it. And I think the success rate is usually north of 80-85% with those. So that's something we're seeing growing. And you've still got things like gap years as well. And I know Chris will probably talk about gap years. You've got gap years at post-18, in my world, so to speak, going and doing a period of time at Camp America or travelling abroad. And I know Chris will probably see ample students that either take a break in their university qualifications, go and do a gap year, or potentially even post-finishing their degree, they go, okay, maybe there's not something right for me now. Why don't I go and travel? Why don't I go and see when I've not got, kids and a mortgage and these things? Why don't I go and see the world? So I think it's really important that we as organisations, both Not Going to Uni, prospects, and us as industry, people in this industry, we are better at talking about those pathways that aren't just apprenticeships, university.
Yeah, I agree 100%, Conor, with that. And this idea that it's not just one thing, is it? All of these over time for one individual might be the experiences that they have. They may do a first year entry level job. They may then go on to go to university, but they may take a year between that, and then they may do some volunteering and then come back to do some further study and training as part of a graduate job. And that's that very healthy idea that you have a portfolio career potentially, where you build it from all these different experiences, and that what you decide to do at 16, 17 or 18 does not get set in stone for the rest of your life. I think that's absolutely important. And I also agree that the industry generally, in its broadest sense, needs always to do a better job at communicating this. And I think it's quite siloed sometimes, isn't it, with the way that people have, we all have different provision and we all have different focuses. But there is like a common message, I think, that needs to be put out as early as possible to as many young people as possible, that there are multiple gateways into your future. And they all have value and worth, and they all relate to each other. I think the gap year thing is dead interesting, because that's been a term that's had so many like stereotypes associated with it, or certainly used to, that it only meant packing up and going and travelling around the world and enlarging amazing experiences in other countries. And it still is for some people, but actually you can have a productive gap year 100 yards from your home by working, volunteering, doing all sorts of different things. It's obviously what you do with that and how you embrace it and what you learn from it, and then what that then becomes by way of an asset when you go for a job or go and do more study, etc. But I think again that should be encouraged much more.
Again, beautifully put, Chris, and it caveats nicely onto my next question, and that's being that we're in results period at the moment. It's results season. Some of our listeners could potentially be disappointed with their outcomes. From both of your perspectives, what is one piece of advice that you would give to someone whose plan A has failed and they're maybe feeling a little lost or a bit sorry for themselves?
Ultimately, that bit of paper doesn't necessarily need to dictate the rest of your life. I completely get it. Some young people will get the results and feel really disappointed. They maybe haven't quite hit the grade boundaries they were looking for. But ultimately, I think it's really important we empower young people that they don't just think, that's it, I'm a failure. I'm never going to get a job, never going to do this, never going to do that. Because categorically not right. There's ample successful people who have absolutely flunked grades, have not done well in exams, some probably never even turned up to school and have had great successes. So I think it's really important we empower young people that day, that moment doesn't need to necessarily dictate your future. And you can still go on to some of the many options we spoke about today, and to keep their options open as a part of that as well. Because at the end of the day, like Chris said, there isn't really a linear, straight career path necessarily in this day and age anymore. They might have to zigzag their career a bit. They might have to go and do a gap year and refine themselves. They might need to go to university. They might need to do this. They might need to do that. And that's fine. There is no one size fits all. There is no right answer to it at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, that's the perfect description, really. Don't feel rushed. I mean, you don't, like Conor said, that piece of paper, what it says on it and what those grades are, they're not the last word about you as a person. It's not the last word about your future. It may be taking a results half full look perspective on it. It could be the catalyst for taking a very different direction, which, who knows, might be the better one. You don't know that. That's the point. And so don't feel rushed into making a remedial decision about it. And certainly don't berate yourself. You've got time is still on your side.
I think there's opportunity for everyone, and there's things to be optimistic about. But I really enjoyed today's discussion. I think it was really, really good, very helpful for me too. But before I let you both go and do like a bit of roundups or whatever, we want to do a bit of a quick fire pros and cons for each of the main options. So I'll let you go whenever we're ready. But if we start off on apprenticeships, one quick pro, one quick con from each of you.
I think apprenticeships, I think one of the big ones everyone always talks about is the earn while you learn aspect. I think being able to earn a salary straight from school whilst learning ultimately and getting a qualification is a huge pro, and one that is spoken about at length. I think one of the big cons, and I noted it down when I was preparing for this actually, is that university social aspect that, don't get me wrong, I've said, you will have a social aspect, but I think it's very different. And I think, the social aspects with people of your age and people on a pretty much the exact same journey as you is actually could be seen as a con for sure, because it's definitely not like for like, and that is a huge part of a young person's journey at the end of the day.
The structured model of an apprenticeship, the way it just fuses study and learning, the focus of it, that's a massive pro. No question about that. I think, the con about the side of it of not having the social thing is important. Perhaps it might be possible to say that you are being put into or entering a route which is very, very specific. And I don't know, I guess, is it harder to jump ship if the apprenticeship route that you're on isn't right for you than it is to if you're doing a more general degree? I don't know, I'm speculating a little bit. It might be asking you to dedicate yourself very, very specifically at a point in time that may not be the right time. But I don't know. I'll be honest with you. I mean, sort of like a degree apprenticeship, which is the world that we know the most about, they seem to be stacked with pros. Let's be honest about it. It's a very good arrangement, and we have people at Prospects working on it with us as degree apprentices, and it looks like a terrific system, and it's one that everybody says, I wish it had been around in my day, which people often say about things like that. Definitely.
Totally agree. The next would be university or other further education. Chris, do you want to go first this time?
Yeah, the pro is the richness of the university experience, the diversity of it, the sheer size and scale, the opportunities for academic, employability, social, personal development, meeting people. Think of the number of relationships, marriages, long-term partnerships that have grown out of the university sector. It's probably almost as many as the workplace. The con is you acquire debt, you are to be working, doing a degree which may not be the right one for you if you haven't made the right choices at the outset, if you've not really thought it through properly. It might lead to expectations about what comes next, which, if you're not careful, can be unrealistic. Because I think the language around graduate employment and early careers, and we've done that ourselves, talking about the job and career of your dreams and all that sort of stuff. It's possible that it can build up expectations which don't always get matched up when you actually go into the workplace, and that's a possible downside as well.
One pro university that's not, I don't know if it's not spoken about enough necessarily, maybe I'm just not seeing it a lot, but I think you get quite a lot of career flexibility if you get a degree. In terms of entry pathways, I think Chris kind of alluded to this with the apprenticeship piece actually, that I think with a degree there's quite a lot of opportunity open to you in terms of, one degree can give you quite a few pathways in very different industries. So I think there's a real nice element of career flexibility with a university degree in this day and age. I don't think it's often as simple as you do blah blah degree and you go into blah blah industry. I think that it is more open than that. Obviously, cost. Chris spoke about 100% the thing we see most common. I think one of the other interesting ones, and Chris, I don't know if you've seen this more, but time. I think some young people are, I don't know if it's afraid of the commitment of 3 to 4 years, but actually you're a bit like, oh, I'm committing 3 to 4 years potentially with no income if I don't get a part-time job and so on. And so I think time and cost potentially nestle together in a weird way as one that young people consider.
It's an interesting point, that, Conor, and it must be a factor to think of that commitment and possibly thinking in terms of what would happen if I didn't do it, and where might I be? Certainly in work terms, because there's no question if you could be more advanced in the workplace, couldn't you? By starting at 18, by the time you come out of university, you're kind of starting 3 years behind, maybe that is a factor. I totally endorse what you said about the flexibility, and it's one of the great strengths of the UK university system is that, and it makes it unusual actually in the graduate job market compared to other countries, as you'll know, is that there's not necessarily an absolute connection between the subject that you study and the job that you go into, and loads of graduate recruiters do not specify subject to study. It's not important to them that you've got a degree, obviously it is, but it is about what you've become at university, what you've developed into, and the experience that you've had and how you articulate that. So it does definitely give you a very flexible footing.
That's great. And I think we're coming to the end of time, gents, to be honest with you, but I just want to give you an opportunity to say any last points, any closing arguments, and then I would love you to just give a little humble plug to where the listeners can follow you.
Well, we'd like to reinforce the point of not being rushed. It's so important. The bombardment of information and resources and expectations and demands for students and for graduates, whatever stage or level that they're at, just finding that space to breathe, to make the best possible decisions for yourself, and understanding that those decisions are not irrevocable. There is flexibility, there's opportunity, and there's a huge infrastructure of people ready to help support and advise and guide you in that as well. That's really important, and that's easily overlooked. So I think that's an important message.
Yeah, massively echo that, and like I said, that one day doesn't necessarily have to define everything for you. At the end of the day, there's ample opportunity out there. As we've spoken about, there's not just this university v apprenticeship kind of argument, so to speak. I don't necessarily think it's an argument, but they're not your only two pathways at the end of the day. There's a lot more out there, so consider all of your options, and like Chris said, don't feel rushed that you need to pick one of those options straight away without doing a fair amount of research and understanding.
That was perfect. So, gents, thank you so much for today. Really, really appreciate it again. It was great talking to you both. And yeah, gents, if you can just let the listeners know where they can follow you, where they can reach out to you, that sort of way.
So, Not Going to Uni on all socials, Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, notgoingtouni.co.uk on the website, and feel free to connect with me as well on LinkedIn, Conor Cotton. Conor with one N. You'd be surprised the amount of people that spell it with two N's. Conor with one N. And Cotton with a double T on LinkedIn. Happy to answer any questions and continue the chat as well if anyone's got any other points they want to raise.
Yeah, Prospects AC UK, and across all the social platforms as well. And we'd really encourage you to use the Job Match tool, which helps you understand just the sheer range of opportunities that are available to you with a degree, or more than 500 jobs on there, and it's can be very eye-opening in terms of what you might be interested in and suitable for. Sign up for our services, and Conor, if you want to get in touch on LinkedIn, it's Chris Ree, REA. Really happy to have a personal chat as well. Thanks a lot.
And that's the end of today's episode. Thank you to Conor and Chris for their great advice today. Remember to check out Brook Street for our latest job openings. There may just be a dream job on there for you. Thanks for listening to the PeopleFirst Podcast. If you find it helpful, please share with a friend or colleague, and give us a follow or rating on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to the show. Thank you, and see you later.